Now that we've introduced the idea of a promise, we can see how that can be used using the fetch API that is in JavaScript. We're also going to talk a little bit about arrow functions because you see this used a lot in conjunction with the fetch API. So we can use fetch to replace XMLHttpRequest. XMLHttpRequest is a little bit more object-oriented. Fetch is going to be a little bit more closely working with this promise API that we've already seen. So basically, fetch is going to retrieve some resource from the server. This is going to be, some particular. We're going to call fetch, and we're going to be using async functions and await calls to make this a little bit more straightforward and a little bit more readable in our code. So here's a little example. If we want to load some particular server resource, maybe this is just a static file. We can say let data equal await fetch. So fetch is going to go off and get this particular resource. It's going to load it from the server, and then data is going to be this particular response it's going to be a response that we get, and then we can parse that. So JSON.parse that data, and we are going to wait for that. So this is sort of all executing asynchronously, but it's doing it in a way that looks like it's line by line. It's much more easy to logically follow. And then once we retrieve that last result, we can go off and do something with this. So this is allowing us to replace a lot of that object-oriented XMLHttpRequest code by just retrieving that, parsing that, and then doing something with the result. In fact, we can use then to get even simpler with this, but we'll get to that in just a few slides. Before we get there, arrow functions allow us to create simple functions in JavaScript succinctly. So basically, an arrow function allows you to return a particular result without having to add all of the function keywords. So you can see here, let increment equal, and then we have x arrow x plus 1. Basically, this is saying an anonymous function with x as a parameter should return x plus 1. That's really all this is doing. So when we say let increment equal this particular this statement, this is just going to create a function called increment that will accept one parameter and then return that parameter plus 1. So you can see, a little bit simpler than having all of the keywords and everything necessary to return that. Now, this works really well if we just need to do one thing, if we need to perform one operation on our inputs. Similarly, we have this next line, let sum equal a comma b, arrow a plus b. So this allows us to very quickly and easily create a function called sum on a single line that just takes two inputs and returns their sum. So arrow functions are nice, again, because they allow us to do one thing very succinctly in our code. Now, the fetch API allows us to take some of these inputs and sort of automatically generate these functions necessary to make this flow very smoothly. So if we want to fetch a particular resource, we can call then to identify when that is retrieved, that response is retrieved. Then we can retrieve that JSON, which will allow us to call then again, then define this other function, JSON result, log that particular result. So this is actually taking the place of all of the code necessary to load some resource from the server. It's taking the place of all of the promises, all of our code around promises and constructing those, and it's doing a lot of work in just 3 lines. Now, this can be a little bit tough to get your head around until you really start using it, but then you can see, this is allowing me to retrieve that resource, parse that JSON, and then do something with that JSON result very quickly without a lot of tedious code connecting all of those pieces. So fetch takes 2 parameters. The main one that you're going to see almost all the time is the URL. That's your first parameter. And then there's an object that allows you to set other different options. So some of those may be, the common ones would be method, headers, and body. So method, you could use, get, post, or any of the other HTTP methods. The headers that you might want to set for your particular request. And then body, which could contain parameters or data or, anything you really want to provide. And then there's a whole slew of others. If you take a look at these slides, you can see a link that defines all of those different parameters, those sort of like object property parameters a little bit more clearly. So the fetch call is going to return a response object, and really specifically, it returns a promise that evaluates to a response. But right now we're blurring these lines a little bit. So the response has a few methods. The methods that you'd probably use most likely with a fetch is going to be either text to retrieve the plain text body of that response, or JSON to retrieve the JSON object that response represents. I think most of the time you would see JSON. There are some reasons why you might want to use text. Maybe you've got something that's like comma separated, or you've got a long list of things, or maybe you've got several lines of records that are comma separated. But generally speaking, this will be JSON for most purposes. And they both return promises as well, which is why you can see a few slides ago we could use that then calls to sort of step through the different steps, different necessary parts of that process. So take a look at the slides. They have a few links in the notes that will direct you to some other resources. Hopefully this is going to clarify how we can use promises in the Fetch API a little bit more effectively. And we'll continue to use this for the last couple of presentations throughout the rest of this course. Thank you for watching.